Hello, I am Deb Coviello, the Drop-In CEO, and as always, I am thrilled that you have chosen to drop in and listen to another amazing leader where week after week I have the great honor of learning, being inspired by folks such as the ones that we're going to introduce you today. And just know I put out this content, these resources for you because I truly, truly care about partnering with the C-suite leader to navigate your challenges and opportunities with confidence. And this week, I'm going to pause a second. David, how do you pronounce your last name again?
Horlock, David Horlock,
Perfect.
Horlock.
Perfect. And this week, I have the pleasure of sharing the mic with David Horlock, who is a passionate leader with 40 years of diverse senior executive experience in the testing, inspection, and certification sector, and has built global networks of expertise to service manufacturers, retailers, and their supply chain partners, ensuring compliance with standards, regulations, and quality requirements across multiple sectors with an expertise in agri-food and FMCG. He has an outstanding, outstanding CV and experience, but I am not going to steal his thunder. And David, I just want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much, Deb. It's a pleasure being here today.
And I, as well, have the pleasure of getting to know you. And thank you so much for sharing this conversation with me and my listeners. A quick shout out to Colin Christmas, the beauty of the network. He introduced David and I, and David and I are kindred spirits. We are both in the compliance space. I, from my quality systems, ISO, food safety. Standards are so important to businesses, and we're going to do a deep dive into this. It's not necessarily about compliance, but what I think David will bring to the table is the sincere importance of these to people, to business, and our global community. But David, I am not going to steal your thunder. Would love to ask you to share a bit about yourself and your journey.
Okay, thank you so much, Deb. And you're quite right. We have to thank Colin Christmas for this. He's a wonderful guy, and he's very passionate about, systems and processes and safety, and spent a very long career with Nestle, making sure that we had, safe quality food. So um, thank you so much for Colin for making this introduction. So a little bit about me. I mean, I'm a little bit complicated because people say, where are you from? And I have to say, what do you want to know? Are you trying to pick my genetics? Are you trying to pick my accent? Are you wanting to know where I was born or where I call home? So in my situation, my hereditary home is English. My parents were English. They moved to Thailand in the late 50s. So my birth and spiritual home was Thailand and Bangkok, where they lived for 17 years. So I grew up there and watched this massive transformation from rice paddy field to super city. I went to boarding school in Australia at the age of 8, so became an Aussie, and then I went back to Asia um, and worked there for the last 40 years, looking after about 14 countries. So I specialized. I did agribusiness. I then went to the Middle East and managed feedlots over there. I then came back to Australia. I worked for SmithKline Animal Health, who sold nutritional products and anthelmintics and ectoparasiticides, and we taught farmers how to optimize production. I then worked for Elders Agribusiness, which at the time was Australia's leading agribusiness company, responsible for animal health and ag chem. And was in their wool and livestock division. I then moved into the TIC industry. So that's where I really sort of shifted gears and went into compliance purely by mistake. So I was very much involved in agriculture, agribusiness, farming systems, developed quite a number of leading standards on protecting and ensuring food was safe at source. I then joined SGS and in the inspection of products, processes, and supply chains, and learned so much. I looked after agri. I went to Thailand, looked after their business there, then went to the Philippines, then went back to Hong Kong, which was the center of global supply chains as Western manufacturing moved from the Western world into the developing Asian countries where labor was cheap, but risk was quite high, and there had to be somebody there to qualify the factories, um, test the products, inspect and audit the processes and those supply chains to make sure that products were safe. So we had product safety, we had process safety, and we had behavior safety. So I think it was a wonderful experience seeing this massive transition from the Western world to the developing world, and then putting in all the compliance issues in place there to basically deliver products which were of good quality and safe in the food chain. And then we moved to garments and textiles and fast-moving consumables and automotive, aerospace, medical devices. These other industries followed later. So that was a wonderful experience and privilege. And I suppose the biggest transformation is starting life, working on a farm, and then you become a salesperson, and then somebody puts you in charge of operations, and then you look after a branch, and then a country, and then a region, and then next thing you realize you're a leader, you're a CO. No one taught you, you just got there. So that was, that's an experience in itself.
But I would love to just, share with you, and I'm not sure if we ever discussed this during the discovery call, was the fact that I also had the pleasure, for those of you who are listening, watching on the YouTube channel, we're actually talking to David from Singapore, and I had the good pleasure of working there about 3 years ago, pre-COVID, where there was a flavor manufacturer who had the keen understanding that standards were important in order to play on a global scale. And so I was responsible for making sure that they maintained their ISO 9001 quality management system standards and upgrading their systems, their food safety standard to FSSC 22000. And so they absolutely recognized that that was so important and valuable to be in the global space. So again, I've enjoyed being in there. Actually been to Singapore twice. It's a lovely part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
But you've been all over
Yes.
the place. But you've been so many places, and I'm just curious, what's your favorite place to live in? I'm just curious.
Oh, that's a really good question, but it's so hard. It's a bit like saying, do you like watermelon, oranges, bananas? What's your favorite fruit? And I think, they're all quite unique, but I obviously love Thailand because I was born there and I speak the language fluently. And they really are the land of the smile and that Buddhist sort of philosophy. Um, the food is wonderful, their culture is wonderful, and it's got this mix of chaos and sort of organization at the same time. It's a great hub to be, lots of beautiful islands and places to visit. So very fond memories of that. And then I spent some time in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is just it's a city on steroids. It doesn't sleep. It's got the old, it's got the new, it's got, beautiful islands, peak walks, and it's just got the incredible, fast-paced environment, which is like, living on steroids. And by gosh, do they know how to move people? When you look at the public transport system there, it really is world class.
Mm.
So that was a great hub, great location in there. You live in Hong Kong and you live in Thailand and you live in Singapore. So Singapore is one of these beautiful manicured places, when done with traveling all around developing Asia, from India through to China, and then you arrive in Singapore, it's like, wow, manicured bougainvilleas everywhere, the roads work, it's green, it rains every day. And there's an element of order.
Mm. Mm.
So I think my favorites, would be Thailand, Hong Kong, Singapore, and all the other countries are lovely countries as well, but they're lovely countries to go and inject in there, get a bit of a cultural change and then sort of come out again.
All right, so this is the beauty of interviewing here. We get to know each other on a more personal level, and I am racking up the next places on my bucket list to go and
Mm.
visit. But, let's go back a little bit to your backstory. You talk about, having opportunities to travel the world and then be in
Mhm.
charge of smaller and then larger and then significant entries, getting to the level of the C-suite. And again, you kind of went through that rather fast. What was that journey like for you? I mean, what were some of the uh, lessons learned along the way? Because there's so many people out there in my network that I know should be in the C-suite and should be in those areas of greater influence, but they don't see themselves as that leader because they don't have the right experience. Tell me what that experience was like to ascend to those higher roles, and what have you learned along the way that maybe we can share with others?
Well, look, that's a lovely question, and I sometimes just wonder how I got there. But I think the key point was attitude. Attitude's a little thing that makes a big difference. I've always said, give 120%, not 10, 100, sorry, but give 120% and do the right thing. I mean, at the end of the day, do the right thing. And we all know what doing the right thing is. And we learned that from the age of 8. So I think you really have to practice that and do the right thing. And I learned from a very young age because I went from managing 20 people in Australia to 500 people in Thailand. And I was moving from, agricultural type work, inspection, right, laboratories, to managing a system certification business where you have professionals who audited the first companies in the world to ISO 14,000, or the aerospace or automotive. I mean, these were seasoned, you know, industry thought leaders in terms of what they did. And here I was, this young little upstart. Um, and smart people like that are very, very technical. They don't like being managed. They like being empowering. But they're also not very disciplined in their systems and processes. And I learned from a very young age that you can't manage people. You can't put scientific reasoning into an irrational, illogical organism. And humans are irrational, illogical organisms. Now, what you can do, you can manage the process. And then you empower people to take ownership of the process. And I discovered, being an agronomist and animal production specialist, and I love cooking, is that a standard is basically a recipe. And the examples that I would give is, put 20 people into 20 different kitchens, with exactly the same ingredients. And in the absence of a recipe, which is time, sequence, temperature, you get 20 outcomes. And I had the same thing when I was consulting in agriculture. I had farmers producing, 5 tons per hectare, some 1 ton per hectare, but the sun was the same, the sky was the same, the ground was the same. And I all of a sudden realized that, wow, recipes are standards, and standards are about repeatability, and they're about putting the architecture in there to actually deliver and implement and continually improve. And therefore, I'm obsessed with standards because to me, they're recipes and processes. The Americans don't like the word standards because they think of them as regulations. But think of standards as turnkey, franchise, how you repeat something and continuously improve.
So you're singing to my heart. And I know early in my career when I was learning a little bit about Mill Standard 9858, IPC 16, 610, I was in the electronics industry, in the defense systems. They were seen back then as compliance standards that you had to check the box, you had to audit, and often gave people like me a bad name because, oh, here comes Deb. She's here to audit for compliance. And sometimes then we get a corrective action. But it's one of those things, and I learned this from they either work, I think they were an SGS auditor that was auditing my fragrance plant ISO 9001. And she says, really, this is a business standard. This is to give you peace of mind. This is to provide the assurance to your customers that they can trust you and build brand loyalty. It is a vital part to businesses. And even now, I'm working with a client right now that's getting worried that as they grow, while they do have some quality issues, they know that
Mm.
if they don't have the right systems and processes in place, because people will always change, that they are at risk for increasing the number of defects and impacting their customers. So they are looking for standards to help build trust and brand loyalty. So I totally agree with you. Standards are critical to businesses.
I do. Look, that's music to my ears, and you're quite right. It's about, standards about repeatability, aren't they? And they're about, as you say, we end up with attrition all the time. And if you don't have standards in there, well, how do you induct people? How do you teach them? How do you train them? And 99% of people come to work wanting to do the right thing. They usually make a mistake because they haven't been inducted, haven't been trained, or they haven't been taught the standard and the process and the procedure to follow.
So again, mic drop moment, because I've actually talked to a lot of up and coming quality and food safety professionals. Our role here is to really educate that it's not about the compliance, but these are vehicles to help you sleep at night because you know people want to do the right thing and you give them the tools and standards to be able to do
Yeah.
the right thing. So, so agree
Yeah.
with you. But
That's an important point because many people want to put standards people into technical buckets, but we have to understand that there are standards for product and functionality. So that's about smoke detectors, fire extinguishers. You know, a product actually works and functions, right? And then there's a standard which could be a methodology of testing something. Then there is a process standard. So these are the ISO standards that came in with TQM and Deming, which are about how do I produce this product which is repeatable for zero defects, right? And then there are now standards for behavior, right? So the standards for, you know, ESG, for human rights, modern day slavery, diversity and inclusion, health and well-being in the workplace. These have got nothing to do with products specifically, but they're about behaviors, right? And they're a combination of process and behavior. And if you're managing a business, you need all of those things, right? And you need a mechanism to prioritize your problems, um, 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 put your business plans together, and then put a process in place where you're going to get execution. Because we must remember that for every 4 visionaries out there, there is one integrator. And integrators are doers. And the best way to do and implement something is put standards in, because if you don't have them, you can't scale up.
and hold people accountable.
Yeah.
So let's go there a little bit. I mean, you and I had some, topics that we wanted to talk about, but now that we're getting into standards, and again, this is kind of be speaking a little bit more to that CEO, C-suite leader that is accountable to a board. And so again, the climate is challenging right now. There's a lot of pressure on boards and large entities to organize around all of these standards, as you said, ESG, DE&I, et cetera. How then does a board even get organized around this to do the right thing and be in compliance, but also leverage the value of these standards? So just talk to, at a very high level, how would a board get organized around all of this?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And the reason it's a good question is because a lot of boards around the world share the same critical board issues. And those critical board issues tend to be global issues. And global issues can only be solved with global standards because we are all so interconnected today, right? Our supply chains are interconnected. So let me give you an example. Can you imagine if everybody went and developed, every shipping line in every country developed their own shipping container? How would we get interoperability of putting a shipping container on a ship, on a truck, on a chassis, to lift it, to load it, to discharge it on an airplane, on a train, and get operability? We do it because we have the ISO guidelines for standards. We have telling time. We have a standard. What if your hour had 11 hours and mine had 12? We wouldn't get on this call in time, right? Um, so they're good examples. Or if you look at where standards haven't worked, think plugs and sockets. We're just trying to draw energy and power. We have many different ways, but in a global world, we need standards. We need global standards for automotive, which we have, for aerospace, for medical devices, for operability. So to go back to the critical boardroom issue, if I was in the boardroom and I had to meet the requirements of ESG, a good starting point would be ISO 14000. Why? Well, it's the world's #1 environmental standard. #2, to implement that best practice standard, you have to get someone in your organization that understands about reduce, recycle, replace environmental impact assessment and start putting a plan together to drive the objectives of the organization, followed by the activity for the output, for the outcome, which then drives the impact. And you institutionalize that. So all the board needs to do is support it. The rest will look after itself. You're subject to audit, just like you are financial audits. And from that ISO 14,000, you will get 12 of your 17 UNSDGs. That's 12 out of 17. Now, if you wanted to address then and move to the next level and address occupational health and safety, under which you could also put diversity and inclusion, you could put health and well-being, you could put, mental health and psychology in there, you could put modern day slavery in there, under the umbrella of ISO 45,000, and with eliminating all the double counting, you could get another 4 UN SDGs. Now you have 12 plus 4, you got 16 out of 17. That's not a bad start. You put your company on autopilot, you embed the culture, and you let the process look after it.
So I'm going to be the idiot in the room here. I am not familiar with that terminology. You said 16 out of 17 UNSDGs. What is that?
Well, if you look at the UN SDGs, they're the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, which most organizations are trying to actually align to. And those standards that I talked about, there's a very, very good roadmap in ISO that actually shows you what standards are connected to the various ones of those UN SDGs.
And
Yeah, so
so,
they can,
yeah. And then you said that you get 16 out of the 17 by implementing 14,001 and 45,000. What then
yeah.
is the one missing?
Oh, the one that is missing there is the one on is UNSCG number 17, which is Partnership for the Goals. But there are other standards that actually would incorporate that. So collaboration, for example, there is another ISO standard purely on collaboration. So that Partnership for the Goal. So the place you would use collaboration is, think of an organization that is putting an asset. So it could be a pipeline, a road, telecommunication infrastructure through 12 countries.
Yes.
Where you've got to work with the engineering department, the planning department, the water department, the gas department, the municipalities, the various governments. So this standard is all about collaboration. How do you actually collaborate and work together and
Amazing.
plan? So, there's standards out there for innovation. There are standards out for diversity and inclusion, for modern day slavery, for carbon neutrality, for climate change, for investing in climate change. And Deb, these are the world's best kept secrets.
And that's why I
And
have you on the
I have
show.
been fortunate enough to have understood this. And it was actually the chairman of BSI, Sir David Brown, who has sit on many boards over his life and had a very productive career there. But he did say to me one day, he says, David, since I've worked with BSI, he says, I have discovered that all these international standards that ISO developed are wonderful tools to address critical board issues.
Mm. Another mic drop moment.
Yeah.
So I got to go back to what in the beginning, as you took us down this path of if you implement 14,001, then the next step is to resource that activity, create the strategy and the execution to get the output, the outcomes, to get the impact, and then institutionalization. From your experience, however, these are all good intentions. Where might companies miss the mark in this process to realize the full benefit?
Look, I think that's really good, and it's a bit like life, We all know that we got to get fit, and we got to eat well, and we got to exercise, but we don't do it. So it's not about the knowledge; it's about institutionalizing your habit, and that's why Aristotle said, excellence is uh, excellence, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is therefore not an act, but a habit, right? So it's habit forming. So I always think, how do I institutionalize habit forming of the disciplines that you want? Because, and I think, standards, whether it's a public standard, a private standard, a company standard, work procedures, a simple recipe in the kitchen, they institutionalize the discipline to do the right thing and provide a mechanism for continuous improvement. And those words came from one of the CEO of one of the oldest wineries in the world that was created in 5 AD. He said, David, I love my certification because it provides a discipline to do the right thing and a mechanism for continuous improvement. And I thought, wow, such wonderful words.
And as I'm thinking about these wise words and the ones that you're sharing from others, I'm thinking about a spaghetti sauce recipe that has been passed down from my husband's grandmother to his mother, and nobody had it written down. And so my husband one day said, Mom, can you write down the recipe? For which then I am in possession of that, for which my kids have asked for the recipe. But because we wrote down the standard, they're able to repeat it time and time again. So that legacy is passed down.
Yeah, no, that's great. My daughter went to the Australian International School in Hong Kong, and they had a program there where they put a cookbook together, and every family had to donate two of their famous recipes, like you were talking about. And this was a wonderful gift, because they are the best recipes, aren't they? Those that have withstood generations after generations after generations. They're nuggets of gold.
They are, absolutely. No, you have been wonderful sharing your expertise and knowledge and the benefits of standards on the global scale. But I would love to kind of go back, though, into your personal involvement in an organization or a standard where you had some kind of impact. What was that? Because I want people to understand the value of the work that you've done, the changes and improvements that you've made. Because I also want people to reach out to you because we just have to get to know Dave. So just tell me a little bit more of a personal story.
Well, I think when I go and look at standards, I think the three most important things that I sort of learned in business was, one is manage the process, not people, right? Number two was simplicity.
Mhm.
Complexity equals confusion, which is the enemy of trust and value. So if people are confused about something and it's complicated, it probably won't work. So you have to simplify, right? And the other one is the four types of knowledge: is to know that you know, which is a strength; to know that you don't know, which is also a strength, because
Right.
there's nothing being wrong. You can't know everything. But as long as, if you know that you don't know, you can find someone that does know and surround yourself with someone that really does know that subject matter. Number three is you don't know that you know. Sometimes that's intuition, it's gut feeling, the ability of knowing without reasoning. And the most dangerous one at all is that you don't know that you don't know. And that's dangerous if you don't create a safe and trusting environment where people can work with you in a telepathic way, where they can approach you because they know you will listen. Because if you don't do that, you'll spend half your life walking around and everybody's talking about you and how wrong you are in the coffee shops and the lift and everywhere else. So I think, for CEOs, you know, um, be open, be transparent, be calm, be credible, because it's how you behave which is most important. Because when you arrive there one day and you realize that all of a sudden you're a CEO, you think, oh my God, people must be talking about me like I was talking about them when I was young in the coffee shop. So, behaviors are really important. You have to walk the talk, and you have to understand your communication style, your strengths, your weaknesses, and the fact that everybody has different communication styles, and I call it situational management, being able to adapt um, accordingly. The other thing on implementation that I think is important that I learned from standards was that um, many organizations have got to learn to prioritize better. And I learned this through what they call the ICI barrel approach. So I'm going to share something with you. If you take a barrel, and the objective is to fill that big cask, that barrel, 100% with water, and it's got holes from the bottom all the way up to the top, which hole do you patch first?
I don't know, like pre-tell.
Well, you want to plug the one on the bottom, don't you? So the level of water can go up. If you fix the holes at the top, the water keeps leaking out the bottom. So I learned that, and you combine that with HACCP, hazard analysis, critical control point, or failure mode effect analysis, but it's just a very simple way. You know, the leaking bucket syndrome, fix up the leak on the bottom first. It's just a simple way of prioritizing anything you do in life. Just think, I've got to solve this problem. What's critical point number one, number two, number three? Focus on the leak at the bottom of the bucket, because anything you do above that's not going to make any difference. Right? And then institutionalize a plan, right? So your plan has to be an activity, an output, an outcome, and an impact. So let me explain what that means, because everybody wants impact straight away. And the thing is, you can't have impact straight away, right? So our objective, Deb, is to feed people. And our activity is going to be, we are going to plant fruit and nut trees. Our output and the KPI you should give on that year or the next 2 or 3 years is how many fruit and nut trees do you plant that survive and don't die to the age of 8 and bear fruit. The output is how much fruit did we produce, we harvested, we stored, we secured, and we got to the marketplace. And the impact is how many people did we feed? Now, you can't get to impact if you don't plant the seeds and nurture those seeds and the trees. So human beings are the same. We have people coming to our organization and people say, oh, leaders, focus on the big stuff, focus on the big oak tree. And I'm saying, the oak tree doesn't need looking after. It's gone through hurricanes. It's been around 500 years. But what are you doing about nurturing the new business? Because that's when people and new businesses are most vulnerable at that cotyledon stage, when they pop out of the ground, when they nurture those first 3, 4 years. And how many of us give KPIs which are focused on not changing every year, but focus on activity, output, outcome, impact? This is a journey. It's not instant gratification on the P&L chart. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to respond, but just keep going. I've got some thoughts around this. Keep going.
Yeah. So I think I'm trying to pull everything in there that, you know, one is, you know, identifying solutions, putting big business plans together. And then, you know, I've always written my KPIs in, okay, objective, activity, outcome, output, impact. And I've always used the example of growing fruit trees and feeding people, because people just get it. And you can apply that to anything.
So this lesson, this model framework is so important. And if nothing else for me, from an inspiration perspective, gives me pause to continue what I'm doing, because I have also been talking about leading indicators, or, you know, the inputs or activities, focus on those and being consistent and successful there. Because if you play the long game in business, your career, your connections, the seeds that you're planting along the way, they will pay off. And so many leaders, this is part of my next book, focus just on the output, the lagging indicators or the results, and they don't shore up, they don't plug the holes, they don't take care of the people, they don't provide them the resources and skills and standards they need for ongoing success. So I so love the fact that you say focus on planting the number of and monitoring the number of trees that survive, so you ultimately get the impact that you want. Such a powerful model.
Yeah. And, you know, people the same. So I was lucky because, you know, I had to build, all of a sudden, you know, human rights became a problem, and I had to build a team of 300-400 people to become social auditors, or aerospace, automotive engineers and auditors, or medical devices, or food safety. So the KPIs I gave the country managers was not give him a P&L and a number. I would say train up 10 people and get 100 customers. I mean, people can relate to that. Or if I just said, get $1 million, he's going to say, well, how do I do that?
You
It's a
gotta.
big difference to be able to visualize because so you got to visualize and put that KPI. Once you got the people there and you got the business there and you got them qualified, then you can start demanding revenue. But if you demand revenue too early when you should be in the investment stage, it's not, it's like saying, it's like sending your 6-year-old out and say, go and earn some money. Off you go.
And in those terms, that's absolutely ridiculous. Though some smart 6-year-olds can do a lemonade stand or a paper
Yeah,
route or
yeah.
something, but they've got to
Mhm.
start someplace with the fundamentals of knowing how to build a business and how to save money and all that.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
God, I wish more leaders would listen to your wise words about what's most important. Focus on the beginning, shore up the holes in your foundation, focus on the tactical activity so you can achieve that outcome eventually. Wow.
Mm.
So I'm getting a little choked up here.
How already when your people are wrong, because your people will really get behind you then. They'll see that you're a man of your words, you're putting the money where it needs to be, you're
Yeah.
building, you're developing, you're growing. And, it's great for building teamwork.
So, David, I appreciate your long history and contribution to the standards industry. And there's so many accomplishments. And oh my gosh, this episode is full of so many amazing sound bites. But we're going to bring this to a close, but this is not the end. I want people to connect with you, get to know you. But I'd love to give you the floor one last time to share some parting thoughts with our audience.
Okay, well, thank you, Deb. Well, I can be contacted on LinkedIn, David Horlock. You can find me there. And I'm at that stage in my life at the moment where I'm going into what I call active retirement. So I'm trying to transfer some of this knowledge into leadership coaching in terms of developing people, but also strategic consultancy and helping, organizations with critical board issues associated with supply chains, with, ESG, with performance, and putting in appropriate systems and processes to do that. So, that's where I get a lot of fun in terms of, helping and coaching and teaching people how to fish.
So, on that note, if you're a CEO or a member of a board that values standards and wants an advisor in that journey because it just makes good business sense and success, I highly recommend you reach out to David. So, David, I want to thank you for an amazing interview. Shout out to Colin again for bringing you to my network, and I just want to wish you well and continue success, David.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you so much for the opportunity and good evening.